The metal clang of the dropped wrench echoed through Miller's hardware, a sound sharp enough to slice through the morning quiet. Elias Thorne, his left sleeve neatly pinned, felt the familiar prickle of heat rise from his neck. He'd been struggling to hoist a heavy box of galvanized nails onto the top shelf, the weight awkward, the angle unforgiving. From the back, a snicker, then a louder, mocking voice. "Need a hand there, Pops?" "Oh, right. Guess you're a bit short on those." Chase Sterling, heir to the Sterling Home Depot empire that had slowly been swallowing up every independent shop in town, leaned against a display of power drills, a smirk plastered across his perfectly coiffed face. His entourage of college buddies chuckled, their eyes flicking from Elias's empty sleeve to the overflowing box on the floor. Elias tightened his jaw, his remaining hand clenching into a fist. He didn't respond. He never did. Responding just fueled them. But the familiar, bitter taste of helplessness coated his tongue. Miller's Hardware, a relic from a bygone era, stood stoically on Elm Street, its worn wooden floors and scent of sawdust a comforting balm against the encroaching modernity of Cedar Creek. For Elias Thorne, a man forged in the crucible of clandestine operations and then broken on a dusty Afghan road, it was more than just a job, it was a sanctuary. After 2 decades serving as a master sergeant in Army Special Forces, a direct hit from an RPG during a recon mission had stolen his left arm and left him with scars that ran deeper than skin. The explosion had taken his limb, but it had also taken his purpose, his identity. He'd returned to Cedar Creek, the small town he'd left as a restless recruit, a ghost in a body that no longer felt like his own. The military, his lifeblood, was gone. His wife, Sarah, had stood by him, a beacon of unwavering strength, but even her love couldn't mend the invisible wounds. He found solace in the quiet rhythm of Miller's, a place where practical problems had tangible solutions, a stark contrast to the chaotic ambiguity of combat. Mr. Miller, a kindly old man who had served in Korea, had given Elias the job, seeing past the missing arm to the steely resolve in his eyes. Every morning, Elias would arrive before dawn, methodically organizing inventory, fixing broken tools, and offering gruff, insightful advice to the scattering of regulars. It was a routine, a semblance of order in a life that had been violently upended. But for the past 6 months, his quiet sanctuary had been invaded by Chase Sterling and his privileged cronies. Chase, whose father had made his fortune ruthlessly buying out small businesses, seemed to view Elias as a personal project, a living embodiment of the loser, small-town life he disdained. He'd mock Elias's deliberate movements, his occasional fumbles, calling him one-armed wonder or the ghost of missions past. The other customers, mostly older folks who remembered Elias as the town's quiet hero, would shift uncomfortably, their eyes darting away, unwilling or unable to intervene. Elias, a man who had faced down enemy fire without flinching, found himself paralyzed by this mundane, insidious cruelty. Today, the mockery had escalated. Chase picked up a small, ornate compass from a display near the counter, an antique, a gift Elias had received from his team after a particularly brutal mission. It was a symbol, a reminder of the direction he'd always found, even in the darkest places. "What's this, a relic from the Stone Age?" Chase sneered, tossing it carelessly from hand to hand. "Does it still point north, or does it just spin around like our friend here trying to lift a box?" His friends guffawed. Elias felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. The compass. That was a line. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. He was a man who had led teams through hell, who had made split-second decisions that meant life or death, and here he was, reduced to a spectacle for a spoiled kid. He closed his eyes for a brief second, picturing his son, David. David, who had just finished Marine Corps basic training, his letters filled with a raw, eager patriotism that reminded Elias too much of his younger self. David, who idolized his father but hadn't truly seen the broken pieces. Elias hadn't told him about the bullying. He couldn't. How could he explain that the man who taught him courage was now being humiliated by a boy half his age? Chase continued, oblivious. "Seriously, Miller, why do you even keep this old junk? No one buys it. Just like no one needs a one-armed handyman anymore." He held the compass up, then let it drop, clattering onto the hard wooden floor. That was it. The compass, a physical representation of his lost purpose, his guiding principles, now lying discarded. Elias felt a primal surge of something he hadn't felt in years, raw, unadulterated fury. He pushed away from the counter, his chair scraping loudly. Just as he was about to speak, to finally break his silence, the old bell above Miller's front door chimed. A hush fell over the store. Standing in the doorway were 5 men. Not in uniform, but their presence was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, eyes that had seen too much. They moved with a silent, synchronized efficiency that spoke of years of training and shared danger. Elias's breath caught. It was his old team. Mac, the burly demolitions expert. Sanchez, the quiet scout. Anya, their sharp-witted comms specialist, now a civilian cybersecurity guru. And leading them his former commanding officer, Colonel Thorne, no relation but a bond forged in fire. Mac stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over Chase and his friends, lingering for a moment on the compass on the floor, then settling on Elias. "Master Sergeant Thorne," he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the small space, "we've been looking for you." Elias, stunned, could only nod. The college kids, initially bewildered, now looked distinctly uncomfortable. The air in Miller's had shifted, heavy with an unspoken authority that Chase Sterling's privilege couldn't touch. "We heard you were having some trouble finding your footing," Sanchez added, his eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced at the dropped compass. Anya stepped past him, bending to pick up the compass with a reverence that made Chase flinch. She wiped it clean with her sleeve, then handed it to Elias. "This still points true north, Master Sergeant. Always will." Colonel Thorne, his face etched with the kind of wisdom only found in command, addressed the room. His voice, though not loud, carried the weight of 1,000 battlefields. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Master Sergeant Elias Thorne. For 20 years, this man served his country in the most dangerous corners of the world. He led teams, he saved lives, and he never, not once, put himself before his mission or his men." The other customers, who had been frozen, now began to stir. Whispers rippled through the aisles. Shame painted their faces. Benny Miller, the proprietor, emerged from behind the counter, his face pale, his hands trembling. On his last deployment, the colonel continued, his gaze locking onto Chase, who had shrunk into a display of paint cans. "Master Sergeant Thorne took a direct hit from an RPG. He wasn't running. He was shielding his team, giving them the precious seconds they needed to get to cover. He lost his arm, but he saved 4 lives that day. 4 men went home to their families because of his sacrifice. And he did it without a single thought for himself." The silence in Miller's was deafening. The only sound was the soft clatter of a paint can Chase had nervously knocked over. "And this," the colonel gestured to the compass in Elias's hand, "this was a gift from those men. A reminder that even when you lose your way, there's always a true north to guide you home." A young mother, clutching her child, walked up to Elias, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you, Sergeant," she whispered. "Thank you for your service." Others followed, a trickle turning into a stream. Old Mr. Miller, his voice thick with emotion, approached Elias. "Elias," he said, extending a hand, "I'm so sorry. I should have done something." But the most powerful moment came when a small boy, no older than 7, clutching a worn toy soldier, approached Elias. He looked up at the veteran with wide, innocent eyes. "My daddy says you're a real hero," he said, holding out the toy soldier. "He says you fight monsters so we can be safe." Elias, who had faced down terrorists without a flicker of fear, felt his eyes sting. He took the toy soldier, his thumb tracing its plastic helmet. For months, he'd felt like a broken thing, a shadow of his former self. But in that small boy's eyes, he saw not pity, but pure, unadulterated admiration. Suddenly, Chase Sterling, his face a mottled red, pushed himself forward, his voice cracking with a desperate bravado. "This is ridiculous. So he was in the military. Big deal. Lots of people serve. That doesn't give him the right to act like he's special." The air froze. The patrons gasped. The members of Elias's old team took a collective step forward, their faces hardening. Elias, who had remained silent through the tributes, slowly wheeled his small hand truck, loaded with bags of potting soil, to face Chase directly. His one hand rested on the compass, a quiet anchor. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough, but it resonated with a quiet power that silenced the entire store. "You're right about one thing, kid," Elias said, his gaze unwavering, locking onto Chase's terrified eyes. "I chose to serve. I chose to leave my wife and my infant son, David, behind so I could deploy to places you've only seen on a screen. I chose to run towards gunfire when others ran away. I chose to spend Christmases and birthdays thousands of miles from home, sleeping in the dirt, eating MREs, so that people like you could sit in comfort and complain about trivialities." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the silent, stunned faces in the store. "And on that dusty road in Kandahar, when I saw that RPG coming, I chose to throw myself on top of my team leader and our comms specialist. I chose to use my body as a shield, knowing it would probably cost me my life, or at least a part of it. I chose to do that so they could go home. So they could see their families, watch their kids grow up, have a future. They lived, kid. Because of that choice, Elias's voice never rose, but each word was a hammer blow striking at the core of Chase's callous ignorance. So yes, I chose to serve. I chose to sacrifice. And I chose to pay the price so that you could stand here, in a free country, and say whatever ignorant, privileged nonsense comes into your head without fear of consequences. The only choice I didn't make was to let your cruelty drive me out of the one place where I was trying to rebuild a life, trying to find a new purpose. But I'm making that choice now. As Elias turned to leave, the store erupted. Not in shouts, but in a spontaneous, thunderous standing ovation. It started with the little boy, then the older customers, then Mr. Miller, tears streaming down his face. Even some of Chase's friends, their faces pale with shame, hesitantly joined in. But the most shocking sight was Chase Sterling himself. His bravado crumbled, his face contorted with a mixture of horror and dawning realization. He stood, his hands shaking, and slowly, hesitantly began to clap. His applause was weak at first, then stronger, a desperate, clumsy attempt at atonement. Colonel Thorne approached Elias, his eyes shining with pride. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "your son, David, wanted us to give you a message. He said he's proud to be your son and that you're the strongest man he's ever known." Elias felt a tremor run through him. David. He hadn't known. He also said, the colonel continued, a small smile playing on his lips, that you're coming home with us today. He's waiting outside. As Elias wheeled out of Miller's Hardware, surrounded by his old team, the standing ovation followed him. Customers reached out, some touching his hand, others offering quiet apologies and words of gratitude. Mr. Miller, eyes red-rimmed, pressed a small, heavy envelope into Elias's hand. "Elias," he choked out, "your supplies are on the house. For life. And you'll always have a home here. Always." The envelope contained a handwritten note to a true American hero. "Thank you for showing us what courage truly means. The staff and patrons of Miller's Hardware." Elias paused at the door, looking back. Chase Sterling was still standing, his face a mask of profound regret, his eyes meeting Elias's. In that moment, Elias saw a flicker of understanding, a seed of change. Stepping into the bright morning sun, Elias was met with a sight that stole his breath. His son, Private First Class David Thorne, stood at rigid attention, flanked by what seemed like his entire Marine Corps unit, nearly 50 young Marines arranged in perfect formation along Elm Street. The street was packed with townspeople, local news cameras already rolling, alerted by the rapid spread of the story online. "Dad," David's voice was thick with emotion as he broke formation and approached, his hand reaching for Elias's remaining one. "I'm sorry I couldn't be here sooner. But I wanted to make sure you understood something important." David knelt beside Elias's chair, his young face earnest. "Dad, I know you've been struggling. I know you felt forgotten, unappreciated, like your sacrifice didn't matter. I know because I felt it too sometimes. Wondering if what we do, what you did, truly makes a difference." Elias tried to speak, but David gently squeezed his hand. "Let me finish, Dad. Every Marine in my unit knows your story. They know about the lives you saved, the courage you showed, the price you paid. You're not just my hero, Dad. You're their hero too." The raw emotion between father and son, the years of unspoken pain and misunderstanding, hung in the air. David stood, his voice ringing with the authority of a man who had found his own purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my father, Master Sergeant Elias Thorne. He's the reason I became a Marine. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right, even when you're terrified." David's voice grew stronger, carrying across the street. "My father lost his arm saving 2 men who were younger than I am now. Those men went home to their families because he chose to put their lives before his own. One of them just held his first grandchild last week. The other is running a successful business and coaching his son's Little League team. They get to have those moments because my father was willing to sacrifice everything for people he barely knew." The crowd, which now included most of Cedar Creek, was silent, many openly weeping. Brad Hutchkins, the CEO of Sterling Home Depot, stood at the back, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Elias. And beside him, his son, Chase, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The transformation from mockery to profound reverence was complete. The ceremony reached its crescendo when General Evans, David's commanding officer, stepped forward. "Master Sergeant Elias Thorne," he announced, his voice booming with pride, "by order of the Secretary of the Army. You are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an opposing armed force. And, effective immediately, you are invited to serve as a senior advisor to the Army's Special Operations Command on veteran transition and mentorship." But the true victory wasn't in the medal or the new position. It was in the moment Elias looked at his son, at his old team, at the faces of the townspeople and saw not pity or discomfort but profound respect, gratitude, and love. The man who had wheeled into Miller's Hardware that morning, feeling broken and forgotten, was leaving as a recognized hero surrounded by a family that extended far beyond blood, to include every person who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. The video of Elias's recognition ceremony went viral within hours, viewed millions of times globally, sparking a national conversation about the unseen wounds of war and the duty owed to those who bear them. Brad Hutchkins, deeply affected, publicly apologized and began funding a national initiative to support veteran-owned small businesses. His son, Chase, enrolled in a veterans outreach program, dedicating his time to assisting disabled servicemen and women. Miller's Hardware became a national landmark, a shrine to service, its walls adorned with photos and stories of local veterans. Elias accepted the advisory position, using his experience to help others navigate the labyrinthine challenges of post-service life. 5 years later, Elias, a nationally recognized advocate, sat in Miller's Hardware, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. Across from him sat David, now a captain, and his wife, holding their newborn daughter, Elias's first grandchild, named Aurora, for the dawn of a new day. As they shared quiet conversation, Elias reflected on how much had changed. The missing arm was still there, the scars still visible, but they no longer defined him. "You know what I learned that day, son?" Elias said, looking at his granddaughter, her tiny fingers wrapped around his. "I learned that heroes aren't made by what happens to them. They're revealed by how they choose to respond. True strength isn't measured by what you can do with a perfect body, but by what you choose to do with a wounded spirit that refuses to surrender."